So tonight's event, an informal introduction to Docker. And as you can tell, it's going to be very informal. If you have questions, if you want to chat about something, please speak up. Okay, yeah, so let's not do that. Okay, thanks. So, let's get to it. Thanks, bud. I'll put it in my pocket. So this is what you guys came to learn about, Docker. So first, quick show of hands. Who's used Docker before? Okay, who's used a virtual machine before? Okay, great. So Docker, it's like virtual machines, but it's not virtual machines. It's different, and it's a little bit hard to understand, but we'll talk about that. So Docker is a technology, Docker is a company, and it's also a technology that makes it easier for you to run containers. So instead of virtual machines, what you do is you just have a single host machine or virtual machine, and it uses features of the Linux kernel to run individual applications in containers. So Docker as a company, I think, is only popular in since 2014 or so. I could be wrong on that, but in the last few years, containers are not that new. There's jail, Solar zones, right? And then BSD jails, and you can change root things. So this idea of containers has been around for a while. But with the advent of Docker, it's made it a lot more popular, and it's starting to catch on, especially in kind of more of sysadmin or DevOps kind of scenarios. So let me just kind of talk about what this is. I don't have any slides. Most of tonight is just going to be a live demonstration. We're going to build a little application and try to use some of the features. So I liked this image because it gives you a good idea of what we're dealing with here. Hey, Cal. Okay, so with Docker, so like I said, so we're not running virtual machines for each application. With containers, you can get a lot more containers running on the same amount of hardware than you could having one virtual machine for each application. Just because the virtual machine has to do a lot more work to replicate all of the hardware and everything for all the resources for each one. Whereas containers are using, it's like a shared set of resources from just the one host, the Docker host. So the way it works is there's a command line client. There's GUI clients too, but we're going to focus on the command line. So there's a command line client which has commands that you would use, which would talk to the Docker host, which could be on the same machine, or if you're on, because containers use a feature of the Linux kernel. If you're on a Linux machine, you can have the Docker host running on your laptop. But if you're on Mac or Windows, they have Docker for Mac and Docker for Windows, where it's basically a very lightweight virtual machine running on your Mac, just running Linux. And so that serves as the Docker host. So you run commands, which will talk to the Docker host. And then there's these two concepts that are important. There's images, which is a description of an application. It's a description of the operating system and the files and all the different code and resources that's in this image. And then a container is the running instances of an image. Then there's also a registry. So you can have, there's Docker Hub, or you could run your own internal registry within your company or something. Or there's some other alternatives. But so the registry has all of the images that you're going to pull down and use. So then you'll pull down an image, and then you can run one or more of these images as containers, or you can build your own images that represent your application. Yes, Cal? You have a question?
What if they could make their own kind of Docker?
What if make your own Docker? Well, you could. That's a good question. Docker is open source. So if you wanted to, you could check out the code, you could contribute, fork it, make your own Docker. It's a good question. All right, so that's a little iffy. Let's we'll come back to this image to reference it again as we do the different steps. But let's just go ahead and dive into the code. So I have well, first let's make this a little bigger, a lot bigger.
Yeah. Give me good Tina.
Okay.
1 minute.
Yeah, 1 minute, everybody.
Okay, I can't catch you my story.
Don't cut anybody.
Can't catch me with the magical story. You need to stay for 1 minute.
Oh, I didn't know that. So, can everyone see this okay? So I have just an empty folder. There's nothing going on here. So we're going to make a new project. The first thing we're going to do, we're just going to make an empty Git repo here. Make a README, doesn't really matter. Create a little lamp app. Create people showcase.
I just talked about computer, like the computer side and on the RY side.
Please don't do that.
I know.
Okay. Just wanted to get to that baseline. So when you have an application, the benefit of Docker is that you can describe the entire environment where your application is going to be running. So let's say I'm going to use PHP for this example. If you know me, I typically am I usually use Go for a lot of stuff, but I don't think you'll really appreciate the benefit of Docker with a language like Go, where it's all just compiled to a single binary. So we're going to use a dynamic interpreted language instead. So we could say I didn't have PHP, or in this case, I'm using PHP 5.5 on my local machine, but I have a business requirement that I need to use in PHP 7 for this project.
Ooh.
Sorry. So we're going to make a folder here. I'm just going to make a folder called HTML, and I'm going to have a little file in here.
Be quiet and don't hit the story. My story makes it quiet.
I don't think so. Okay. I think it's get PHP version.
Are you using gum?
So let's see if this is right.
Are you using gum? Are you doing gum?
His name's Brian.
Books. You do gum. I'm like.
Just PHP version. Okay, great. All right, cool. So yeah, so locally I'm on PHP 5.5, right? The way you use Docker is you make a file called Docker file. So this is similar to Makefile, if you're familiar with that. And all Docker files, there's a particular syntax for Docker files. And the way it works is they all start with this phrase from, and you got to say a base image that you're starting from. So I'm going to start, I want to use, you could do a couple things. We could start with a scratch image, which is just completely empty. And then we could have commands in here to install PHP. We could do from Ubuntu. Right? It would start with a Ubuntu image. And then we could install whatever version of PHP that we want. But if we look on Docker Hub, this is, let's go back. I'm on hub.docker.com. I'm going to search here for PHP.
That's his candy. 1 second. The gum candy.
You can pick it up. It's okay. There's different images on here. So there's official images like this one. I didn't mean to click it. Watch out for the cord. There's official images like this one. And then there's also public images from just people in the community that have kind of bundled their own thing. We're going to go with one of the official ones. So this PHP image here will, there's different versions available. So I want to get one of the version 7s. And then even within that, there's different versions. So you have to kind of just read and see what the difference is. So I want to use this one. It's PHP is in the image, and then there's this colon, and then after the colon, this is called a tag. So this is like the image name, this is the tag name. So this is the image with tag 7011-alpine. So this is going to be PHP version 7.0.11, and Alpine is a distribution of Linux that's really small, and it's great for Docker images because you'll end up with a tiny image at the end. And then the minimum that you need for like a hello world Docker file is you need to have the base image, and then you need to have the command that this image is going to run. The idea with containers is that each one is supposed to only run one process. So like this is the primary thing that this is going to do. So you might have an image that runs like MySQL Server, or one that runs Apache, or something like that. So we're just going to do this to keep it easy. There is an Apache-based PHP image, this one right here, which would run Apache and like just serve our stuff up for us. But I'm going to use the Alpine tiny one because I want to make it easier later when I deploy this. But we're going to do So we're going to have the command that this image is going to run is it's just going to run PHP using the built-in web server. It's going to bind to port 80, and it's going to serve out of the folder var devICT. I think it's like this, actually. But I don't have any code in this image yet, so I need to add it. So there's a couple different commands. One I'm going to use is called copy. So I'm going to copy my HTML folder to var www.html. See if this is right. So once you've got your Docker file, in order to actually run it, hey Alpine, that's somebody else's monitor. I don't think it's a good idea. Let's leave it.
Run electricity. Now, if I on this thing. No. Okay. Now. No.
So okay, so I have my Docker file. You run the command is docker build, and then if I did this, it would build it, but it wouldn't be super useful. I want to tell it the name. We're going to call it my app. So you give a name for the image that you're trying to build, and then you have to tell it the directory where to the context, like we're going to start from here down. So when I run this, so let's look at what it's saying. Okay, so step one, it finds this command. This is from this image here. I've already downloaded this image, so it's using it as a base. Quick side note, if I hadn't already, the way you do it, the command is docker pull. So I would say like docker pull PHP, let's do like the Apache or the PHP 5 one. Docker pull PHP 5 Alpine. So it's going to pull from the registry, and it's pulling all this down. Now look at this part. This is kind of cool. You see all these different like hashes, and so these already exist, and then now it's downloading these. One of the features which we'll really show later, Docker uses this like layered file system, where it keeps a cache of, like it has like a hash that represents different levels of the file system, and it keeps those in cache so that when you make changes, like we already know from like this point up, we already have that. We can just reuse it. And then we only have to pull down these additional pieces.
My mom see when you reuse it. I will use it.
Kel, will you do me a favor?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Did you do it? Did it help you?
You should go work my farm. Thanks. Okay, let's go back to here. Okay, so so I built my app here. So I built an image named my app, it used this as the base. So it found this SEID, it found that in the file system. And then it's copied in my code, so that creates a new layer in the file system. Then we define that the command it should run is this. And it's like, okay, great. And successfully built, okay, we're good. Okay, you've built it, now what do you do? If I run this command, docker images, you can see there's all these different images that I've already pulled down or built myself. So this one that I built in my app, its tag is called latest. This just means I didn't provide a tag. That's the ID, that's when I created it, and this is how big it is. So you can see some of these, like that Alpine one I mentioned earlier, it's only like 5 meg, like the entire distribution is just tiny. So this makes it a really good base for building images. Whereas like here's like the Ubuntu one, it's like 120 some. Here, like this Go one is giant because it has all like these tools built into it. Here I downloaded Bosun is like a monitoring system. I had downloaded that, and I'm using that at work, and that image is like 500 meg. So anyway, so my image, I built my image here called my app. So now I want to run it. Let's go back to our overview. So like when I did Docker pull, it talked to my Docker host, which talked to the registry, which is Docker Hub, and it pulled down the image for PHP 7. So now I have that image. And then I used that, when I did Docker build, it used that image as like a base to make a new image called my app. And now I'm going to run it. So I'm going to say Docker run. And we will say, what do I want to run? I want to run my app. I don't want to do anything else. Just do that. So, okay, so it's running. You can see here that it's PHP 7. It's running, like this is the output that you would see if you ran the development server. Okay, that's great. And we know that it's bound to like port 80, but how do I get to that? How do I see it? So like here, if I look, there's a command called docker ps, which I'm gonna make that smaller so you can see it all. Okay, so there's a container ID, because remember, like a container is like an instance of an image. So I have this container ID of this image, my app. It's running the command, and then there's that php-s, that command. We can see how long it's been up and running. It's got a name on it. This port section is blank because I didn't do anything when I did the run, so it's not gonna, like it doesn't actually publish these ports at all. So we need to change our docker run command. And actually, yeah, if I try to kill it, it's not gonna work. So we're gonna come down here. You see how there's this name on the end, grave hair? We're gonna say docker kill grave. Okay, great. So that killed it. Let's run it again. I happen to know, in my case, I need to have these flags on. So with Docker run, you'll do this sometimes where you have the flag -i means you want an interactive session, like it keeps standard in attached, and then -t will tell it to allocate a terminal, like a pseudo terminal within it. So then that way, when I run it, I can actually kill it. So yeah, now there's like more output here. Do Control C. Okay, great, it's killed. I probably here if I run that again, do docker ps. All right, now its name is pedantic alien. So it automatically will assign a name to containers if you don't specify one, but that's hard to manage because then you have to look it up every time if you care. So instead, when I do docker run and I'm going to say my app, I'm going to add a flag. There's like a long form or short form. We'll do this long name and we'll call it reader. Okay, great. So it's running. And if we look at docker ps, great, we see the app is there called greeter. but we still didn't fix the port deal, so we can't actually make a request. So let's close that again. I'm going to close this. There's another flag, -P, which stands for publish, or you think it stands for port. Right? The man page says publish. But, so what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to take port 8080 on the host machine, and we're going to bind that to port 80 in the container. So it's telling me it didn't work. It says we have an error from the daemon conflict. The name greeter is already in use by the container with this ID. So when I do Docker PS, there's no containers listed there. But if you have the -A flag, every time I launch the containers, like they're still there. I could start them back up again if I want to. So I need to get rid of those. So what we'll do, this is a fun trick. There's a flag Q on Docker PS, which is like intended to be used with scripting. I guess it stands for quiet. So it only outputs the IDs of those. And there's a command docker rm, which will remove a container. So if we do docker rm that, then, okay, great, it deleted all of them. PS-A, okay, they're all gone. So I deleted my old containers. The thing that I was doing wrong, since I'm just trying to like test out, there's another flag, which is rm. So it's not two flags, r and m. It's one flag. It's a long form flag, so 2 dashes, rm for remove, which just means remove this container when it's done. That way it won't stick around. Okay. So I'm running. The container is listening to port 80 on the container. Here, we're going to go to localhost 8080. Huzzah! We're on PHP 7.11. Great. All right, see you later. That's the end of it. No, there's more. But wait, there's more. Great. Okay, look, it's doing all that. I'm going to close down from here. So when you're using version control, it's a good idea to commit frequently, especially when you get to any kind of milestone. So in this case, we look. I see I have some new files. This Docker file in this folder. I'm going to add those. Yep, looks good. All right, what were my changes? I added this. I added that. Looks great. Okay. So it's like add basic. Okay. So I want to make this a little bit more useful, a little bit more complicated. I want to make an app that can greet people by name. So I already wrote this up ahead of time, but so I'm just going to go through this part quickly. So if you're using PHP, it's a good idea to use Composer to manage your dependencies. So we're going to make this thing called Jacob Walker Greet. Yep, that's great. That's fine. Yep. Okay. Sure. So, oh crap! No, I don't want to do that. Yep. No. Yep. Okay. I also want to add Silex, which is like a PHP micro framework. Just let that run. Okay, well, I guess while that's running, let's work here. Okay, so let's change this a little bit. I want to do let's see if that's let's see if this is right. I don't know. Look pretty good. So I made some changes. If I do Docker run again, I guess you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. But okay, let's make it obvious. We're using Silex, not PHP, whatever. Okay, so now if I do Docker run, and there's no change here. It still says you are on PHP, whatever. And the reason for that is I didn't rebuild the image. So the only way the image in this current scenario is going to see the new changes is when I rebuild it. When we look at our Docker file, all that it is just the base, and then we copy that code and then we run the command. So I don't need to change any of that. I just need to run it again. So we're going to run, and we'll just run it again using the same flags. It's fine. So you can see again, this is here. Does anybody remember what this SHA was before? This is different now. So there's the command, and we have a new container or image. So if I say Docker run, no, it's dying because it is different. It's dying because it can't find the vendor folder because I didn't add that to the image. So do vendor. Okay, let's see, build. Do run. Didn't like my code. Okay, so I wrote this code. Okay. Let's see, what is that? So that's application. Okay. Do a build. Run. Cool. So it's a little bit better. But still, we haven't really functionally done much different. Let's add a second one. Say, I want a new path that says if you go to greet, and then whatever, we will we'll get the name from the URL, and we'll say hello, whatever. Okay. So if you go to greet Jacob, it should say hello, Jacob. Do build. Run. Oh, and I got to change the URL. We'll go to greet devICT. Hello, devICT. Great. Cool. Not much new about Docker here yet, though. But is anybody else tired of building and running every time you make a change? That seems really tedious. So we are going to run okay, so when we say Docker run, there's some more flags we can give. Let's make that a little shorter. So there's a flag V, which stands for volumes. So what you can do is you can take a particular directory on this machine, and we're going to mount it as a volume within the container. And you have to give it the absolute path. You can't just do like dot. Now, my shell, like everyone's shell, defines the variable pwd for the present working directory, so we'll just use that. So we'll say the current directory, we're going to bind that to var www. And then try to have flag. Oh, I thought I could do that. Try T or something. Okay, great. So now it's running, but let's see. Let's see if it's actually right. So we'll say, hello there, whatever. Now I'm not going to rebuild, and I'm actually not even going to rerun. I'm just going to leave this daemon running. And now it's like, oh, hello there, whatever. So we could, because we've mounted this directory within the container. Great. For dynamic interpreted languages like PHP, that's great. If you're using a compiled language, maybe that doesn't work so well. Okay. Let's go ahead and just save that real quick. So what did I change? No, let's have those. What did I change? I modified my composer file to add Silex. I added the route. I added vendor to the git ignore. And then here my Docker file. I added this line. I copied an additional folder in there. So we'll say add Silex and a second. Cool. What was next?
Is there a way to automatically sort what you did? Can you do that for?
So the question for the video was, is there a way to get it to automatically recompile if you're using a compiled language like Go or C++ or something? You can. It's just a little bit more of a workaround beyond the scope of what I wanted to cover today. Because if you're going to use it, if you're going to do that, like without Docker, to get it to automatically recompile, you would probably be using some kind of file system watcher that would say like, oh, whenever I make a change, run this command to recompile my thing. So the problem just exists in that it depends on like the kind of file system that you're using in the virtual machine that's running your Docker host, assuming you're on a Mac, and it may not always see those file system change events, and then so there's just like some workarounds. You can do it. It's just more work. So this is pretty cool. I want to make this fancier though. So has anybody ever heard of the command line program called Figlet? Like you say Figlet and some text, and it gives you like ASCII art of that text. It's amazing. I don't think I have it. So let's see. Figlet. Yeah, I don't even have it on this machine. But I'm going to change my Docker file a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our code in our PHP code to execute that command line program and get the output and send that back to the user. But if we did that, we would get the same error. It's like, oh, Figlet's not installed. Like that's not considered a critical thing that needs to be installed in the 5 megabyte Alpine image, so it's not there by default. Yeah, I don't know why. Priorities, I guess. Put that backwards. Trying to be fancy, it's not working. There we go. Okay, so when we're building our Docker file, we have a command called from, which defines like the base image, right? We have copy, which is going to copy code into our image as we're building it. CMD is the command that our Docker image is going to run. There's another command called run, and you can define like shell commands that will be ran when you build the image. Now these aren't ran like when you launch the image. Like these are just a one-time thing. I don't think this is going to show how I want it to show, but okay, so APK add no cache Figlet. This is APK is the command within Alpine Linux to install something. I put it on the flag no cache so that like any metadata that it might put together while it's running this, I don't want that saved in my image because I want to keep my image size down. And then the command I'm trying to add is Figlet for the package. So I'm going to Control C out of here. I'm going to say Docker build. I was worried it wouldn't work like this, but it did. Now, I want to show something about this here. So we've got Okay, step one, we're starting here just from this base image, as shown, hasn't changed. Step two is we're going to do this command, run apk add no cache figlet. Great. So it's running this command in this like intermediate container that it's using as part of this process. So here's like the output from that command. You can see this is what Alpine Linux does when you install something. Okay, that's done, great. It removes that intermediate container 448. Okay, great, then it moves on to step three. We're copying some stuff in. This is all the same as before. So to actually, let me change my command a little bit here. We're going to say, we're going to do figlets, and I want to add onto that escape this shell arguments. No, actually, I want to do like that. I think this is right. So I'm gonna build again. Look at this. When it gets to step two, that run apk add, it's just using the cache. We haven't changed anything about this line or the lines before it. So it's just going to use the cached version of that. So it's not going to actually go out and fetch figlet again. This gives you a little bit more stability. And depending on the package manager that you're using within your container, if you can specify like the particular version of figlet, that would be even better. But so this is the cache in action, which is great. And then it moves forward, it's copying all that stuff in. I'm going to run our command again. That looks terrible. Oh, and I remember why I did it like this. Build. Oh wait, why am I building? I forgot. I have it mounted. I guess I didn't need to do that. Oh, well. Cool. That's fancy. Hello, devICT. So that's a milestone. That's a.
So do you know how it verifies or how it knows that it does not need to go back out?
Yeah, so it's based off of the like the actual like text in the dark file. So the question was, how does it know that it doesn't need to go out and refetch it? So if I changed something about that, yeah, because it would be beyond the scope for Docker to know about like every package manager.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
but so it just goes off the Docker
It's
file.
something to be aware of if you have in your deployment method
Right.
fetching something from our server that provisions a unique ID or something.
Right.
That comes down because it won't do that.
Yeah. So you do need to be aware of it.
Is there a
It
way to
will
force
use
it?
There is. It's a good question. Is there a way to force it? And you need to do build. You can add the flag no cache. So then it's like, it's going to go through and do all of it. Yeah, and that's a good question. All right, those changes looks good. So we'll say print commit and say add figlet and a fancier greeting. Cool. Just love this. Let's try it again. Let's see. Hello, Jacob. Okay. Hello, Jacob Levi Walker. Why is it wrapping onto the next line? Like, I don't like this. This is a bug. So I'm gonna file a complaint. This needs to be fixed. But let's say I don't know enough about Figlet to know why it's doing this. And I don't have Figlet installed on my machine. I could go look at the docs, and I could probably like find the man page online and like go through that. But I learn best by like just trying stuff out. So we're going to do Docker run, and I want to say we're going to have those flags I and T on here because I want this to be an interactive session. Please allocate me a terminal. And then like the name of my image. And if I just press enter right now, it would run the command that we defined in our Docker file, which was php-S. But you don't have to do that. You can specify your own command. So in this case, I want to run the command sh. So now, this is an inconvenient. Okay, let's do. Okay, so my Mac is the $sign. Okay, and so now the prompt has changed. And if we look at like, my host name is different. Like I'm inside the machine now. So if I look, do like ls, see all this stuff. If we look at like ls var www, there's like my HTML folder, my vendor folder. So all that stuff was pulled in. That's mounted there, so you can see that we're inside the container right now. And the reason I wanted to show you this was this is a common kind of debugging thing, or if you're just trying to like build an image and you're still trying to figure out how you want it to be, where do you want things to go, what commands do I have available. Like I don't use Alpine Linux all the time. I didn't know that apk add --no cache was the command. Like I just hopped in an Alpine container and tried it out. And this question?
So when you actually pass the shell to open on the shell, does it try to then try to execute the command that it had in the Docker file? Or
No. So the question is, does it try to execute the command? It doesn't. So when I'm
this first reference, it just looks at
right. So it's if I just press enter right now, where I haven't specified the command, it'll run the Docker file command. But if you provide a command, then it's going to use that instead.
Does everything inside of the Docker container run through? It looks like it root there.
In this case, I am.
Yeah.
It depends on. So the question was, are you always root? It depends on the distribution that you're using for your base image, and there's also, I think there's. Yeah, there's user flags when you do Docker run to say run me as this user instead. And that is actually a really good question because there are some security concerns involved, like just beyond the regular you shouldn't run your applications as root. There's additional security concerns with running applications as root within a Docker container that have to do with the potential for someone to break out of the container and access the host or other containers on the host. If you follow the best practices, which you can read about online, then you're fine. But yeah, it was a good question. So I wanted to know about Figlet. So now, let's try this. Figlet, hello. Fancy. What options do I have? Figlet-H. Okay, so it's telling me I could do, it's like a font file, there's a smush mode, there's an output, okay, -W, output width. So I can specify that flag, so that's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna change this code up a little bit. And we'll add the flag -W200 to get it to be 200 columns wide. Oops. Okay. Now I'm gonna just close out of this. Oh, and you know what? When I was running these just like little shell terminals, I didn't put the RM flag on them. So now like they're all still there. So we're gonna clean them up. Say nuke them all. Okay, so what I want to do is reader. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna run. Go ahead and mount as volumes, fine, because I've already installed Figlet. I don't need to change anything about it, my base. Cool. So now it's not forced. Now it's not wrapping after however many columns that was. Probably 80, 120, something like that. Let's commit that. All right. Okay, so I think that from this, you can kind of see the benefit of knowing that my application is going to run within a predefined and prescribed environment. So in this case, like if the command line tool Figlet, or that's silly, but like ImageMagick, that might be something that you want to like shell out to, or just any other tool, or maybe not these kind of tool. Maybe you need to have, maybe this is like a Python app and you want to install like particular system libraries, or like this is a PHP app. Maybe I want to install particular PHP extensions. You can have that all defined in your Docker file, and then know that everybody on your development team, and as well as the production environment, are all running in the same space. Virtual machines also solve that problem. This is just another solution to it that can potentially use less resources, maybe enable some unique, some novel kind of workflows. Another really, so like there's running your app within a container. That's a common thing. Another thing to do is to run your dependencies within containers. I use at work, and so I have a Docker container that runs a particular version of MySQL. So for this example, we're not going to use MySQL because I didn't want to deal with migrating the database when we go to deploy. So instead, we're going to use Redis. Redis is a different kind of database. You can do some simple stuff with it or some complicated stuff. We're going to do the simple stuff today. So I want to have, here, we'll just close that down. So I want to have a Redis server running that I can talk to in my application. So what we're going to do is, the first thing we would do is we'd say like Docker pull Redis. So I didn't specify a tag like Redis colon something. So it's just using latest, which is actually considered kind of an anti-pattern. A lot of people will tell you like don't use latest. You like just specify the version that you want. So right now it's downloading that, but I don't really want that. I want to do Redis 3.0. I already have it. The hash match is fine. Great. So we're going to use Redis 3.0. So I want to run it. We're going to say Docker run. Now, when I was doing my application, I was running it like interactively. Like I had it running in the foreground. I don't want to do that with this one. I just want a Redis server running that I can talk to. So we'll say run -d for daemon. And then I want to say, we're going to call it my Redis. That's like the name of the image is Redis. So I want to name my container something that I can find. So we'll call it my Redis. Do I want to publish? No, I don't want to do that. So and then we'll just say Redis 3.0. I think that's all I need to do. Cool. It gave me back the ID of the container. Just useful for scripting. If you don't care about it, you can ignore it. But if we do Docker PS, I'm gonna make my screen a little bit smaller. There we go. There's a container ID. It's using the image Redis tag 3.0. This is the command that it's running. This is a pretty common thing people will do is because like your image is only going to run. The container will only run one command. If you want to do some kind of setup, you might define like an entry point, like a bash script or something, and that's what gets ran. And then if we connected to this container and looked at this image, we'd see what that is. We see it was created 12 seconds ago. It's been out for 11 seconds. It's got this stuff about ports here. We didn't publish this port, but it's in the Docker file that says this is like a port that you care about. And you can have it like automatically publish ports you care about. So like random ports. And then this is the name that we defined. So, okay, that's cool. How do I use it? So Let me do something here. Not going to live code all that. But I do need to. All right, let me just see. So there is a PHP library for talking to Redis called Redis. So I'm just installing it right now. Great. So in my code here, I've done a couple things. So here I make my Silex application. I'm going to make my Redis client. Now I'm just going to stick it here on Silex implements this interface. You can just use a different array and stick stuff on it. When I make my Redis client, I have to tell it where to find the Redis. So we're going to use an environment variable called Redis URL. And then down here, whenever I greet somebody, it's going to use my Redis client, and it's going to push into this key names, the value, whatever name you said. It's still saying like hello name, piglet-w. And then I'm going to add a second route called greeted. So I just want to get a list of everyone that my application has ever greeted. So it's going to use Redis again, and it's going to, this command lrange, it's like, I think it's list range maybe, I don't know. It's basically going to say like, give me back all those names, I'm going to loop over them and build up this like unordered list, stick them out. I'm going to use HTML special cars here because you guys are going to try to like XSS me. Great, and then we'll run it. When I run, now that I made this change, when I need even more flags on this command now, like I'm really playing that up because I have a solution at the end. So there's what you can do is there's a command called, or a flag called link, and what you can do is you can specify other containers, and it will link the containers together so they can talk to each other. So I don't actually have to expose the port on my Redis, my little Redis container. I don't have to expose it to like the rest of the host or to any other containers. It's just going to be exposed to this other container that's running my app. So the way it works, if I get this backwards, tiny. Okay, it's like my Redis colon. So it's like the name of the name of the container, thank you, and then colon. And this is going to be how you're going to refer to it within this container, the app container. Okay. So I want to show you that link in action. So there is a so I've got my app running right now, right? Well, I guess greeter is the name of the container. So I want to do there's a command. I showed you Docker run. When you do Docker run and you give it a command like bash or sh or something, it makes the container, runs your command, and then if you put the rm flag on it, it would remove it when it's done. But that's a new container. I don't want a new container, one that's running. I want to connect to it and look around so that I could show you how this networking works, that they're linked up. So instead of Docker run, we do Docker exec. We're going to do the same flags, I and T. I want to run a command, the greeter container, and I could just do if I just do ls, it would run the command ls within that container, and then now I'm back to my prompt. So like if you wanted to just do like one-off commands, you could, or in my case, I want to start a shell. Cat. Okay. So if we look at it's the file, if you're familiar with Unix networking, and there's a similar thing on Windows, I think it's called the same thing, hosts. But like, so you can, is it etc host still? Okay. Just in a different place. Okay. So within an etc host file, you can just define like domains or domain names and the IP for that thing. And when your operating system is resolving a domain name to turn it into an IP address, if it's in the etc host file, it'll just say, oh, this is it. I know it. I don't need to go up, talk to a DNS server. I just know it. So when you do that Docker link, Docker run with the link flag, in your etc host, it creates entries for, so like this IP 172.170.2, it has that as Redis. It also has it as my Redis. It also has the ID of the container. So any of these three, if I use one of those as like a domain name or like for like a URL, it would just resolve it to this IP, which is part of it creates a network for your containers, just like an internal network. So this is how they get linked together. So now that I know that, in my code here, I could say like the way Reddit's URLs work, it's like Reddit's // and then like a domain name, and then like a username and password if you had one. Our container just doesn't have one. So I could just like hard code that here. The problem with this, I know, is when I'm going to deploy this at the end, it's going to be different. So instead, I want to use an environment variable. So I need to come back here. We're going to cancel this. We're going to add another flag, my Docker run, -e for environment, or environment variable. So I'm going to define that I want an environment variable called Redis URL, which equals Redis // Redis. I think that was it. Good enough. Okay, so it's running. If I did everything correctly, when I reload this, nothing will have changed here. But now if I go to the path greeted, look, it pulled that out of the database. So if I go to greet Jacob, L, Carter, Roy, and I look, it's like, oh, great. It's talking to the database, and it's all running, and I didn't have to install anything. There's some people in the Docker community that are really, really big on never install anything if you can avoid it. And I like that idea. It's great. Like, there's nothing, everything runs in containers. Nothing is installed on this machine. You want a particular version of Ruby? No problem. You want this version of Python with these libraries? Great. Just make a container for it. Keep it all separate. So this is pretty cool. Let me just commit my changes here. What did I change? Yep, I added that. Change all that code. It's beautiful. We're going to say add Redis. Okay. There's two things I want to do before we're done. I'm running this just locally right now, but I want to deploy this to production. Like, where do you go from here? There's actually a lot of answers to that question. I don't know all of them. There's a lot of really great tools like Kubernetes. There's like Docker Swarm. There's a bunch of different services that can run your Docker images. Amazon has, I think, 3. There's a bunch of different ways that you could take your Docker image that you've built with like Docker build and then go run it. One of the things is you could push them out to like Docker Hub. So I just wanted to show something real quick. Yeah, at one of my previous jobs, we had a need for a GeoIP service. Like, you give me an IP address and I'll tell you the geographic information for that IP. So it was like a little microservice. Like, we didn't, like, our application depended on it, but we didn't have to put it in our application code. Like, it was a standalone service that just ran by itself within like our infrastructure. And so we built that into an image using just like some existing stuff, bundled it up, pushed it up to Docker Hub, and then on in Amazon, we defined like, okay, I want you to run the image, WBMG GOIP. I need this many instances of it running. Okay, click a few buttons, and then just like spins them all up. It was great. So you could do something like that. We're going to use instead Heroku. They have, this is like a newish feature for them to like support direct containers. But I thought it was pretty easy, so we're going to do this. So the first thing you would need to do, make sure that you have Docker working and you have Heroku working. If you don't, I'm not going to start a new Heroku account and go from the beginning, so I assume you already have that much. If you don't, if you're curious, we can walk through it later. You have to run the command to like install the Heroku plugin. I've already done that. You have to make sure that you're logged into the Heroku registry, the container registry. So like here, Docker Hub, this is Docker's the registry that they run, but all of the software for a Docker registry is open source, and other companies run their own registries. So make sure I'm logged in. Yeah, I am. Okay, good. What was I doing? This. Okay. All right, we're going to turn this into a Heroku app. So we'll say Heroku. We'll call it like devICT greeter. Oh, crap. Heroku creates devICT greeter. Okay, so it made an app on Heroku for me. I could push it. Oh, first I need to add that. This one. I need to add the add-on for Redis. So the Heroku Redis add-on has like a hobby tier, which is all I care about right now. So when we look at it, so what they're going to do is they're going to just define the URL for the Redis instance they create for you in this environment variable Redis URL, which is why I use the same environment variable in my code. I'm going to go ahead and provision this add-on. Great, they've created a Heroku Redis instance for me. So now I should be able to just do Heroku container push. Then if you don't specify, it assumes you want to push. We have different kinds of containers. This is a web one. Okay, so right now it's building my image. So it's going to build it under a new name, like registry.heroku.com, devICT greeter web. And it's pushing to Heroku's container registry. And ultimately this is why I went with Alpine for my base, because I knew I was going to be doing this live. I didn't know if everyone was going to be watching Netflix while they pretend to listen. So I wanted a small image. So even though it started on Alpine, there's still a bunch of crap in it. So it was like 50-something megs.
So where's all the images and the layers saved on? So turns into pretty big.
Yeah, so the question was, where are all the images and the different layers saved on your computer? I don't actually know, but what you can do, there's a command docker images, which shows you all of the images that you've downloaded as well as like the intermediate images. So like each one of these is like a step in building like my app. And you can also do like -A, it'll show you like orphaned references that don't exist anymore. And I don't know, they get stored somewhere. I don't know actually. I think it's like
Docker, bar Docker or something, and then the
SHA,
Yeah.
and then you'll actually see the file system inside of the container.
Right, and it depends on if you're on
Maybe
Linux
not
or
to
Windows or Mac.
manipulate.
It's like, I know that since you're on Mac, you use like Docker.
Well,
Then-
you used to have to use boot to Docker.
Okay,
That's been deprecated. They actually have now like Docker for Mac,
okay.
which is a lot easier than boot to Docker was. But yeah, so like there's a virtual machine. So even though I'm not using boot to Docker and it feels like a native experience, there is a virtual machine running on my computer that is running a tiny distro, probably out by Linux, I don't know. And that is what's serving as the Docker host. And so every time I run a Docker command, it talks to that host and sends it all the information. So I would assume it's stored there,
Okay.
like within that file system that's mounted for that virtual machine.
If it's on a true Linux computer, then it just names it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, if you're Docker, if you're running Linux, then you can have the Docker host be running on your machine.
I think there's a Docker inspect. I'll tell you a lot more about
There is. So if you do Docker inspect and then the name of the image of the container, it'll just tell you a whole bunch of information about it. Stuff internal and external. I don't know everything's in here though. Let's see if that's done. Okay, so it's done. So I'm gonna say Heroku open. No, Heroku logs. Permission denied. Let's see. Oh, yes. I forgot about that. So another change that you have to make to support with Heroku, you can't just bind to just whatever port you want. They will set an environment variable with the port, and you have to bind to that port. And that's the other thing, like your the Heroku, the Docker image running on Heroku is not going to be running as root, and that's all in their documentation. So they suggest that when you're testing locally, you put in the appropriate flags to ensure that you're not root, because you're not going to be root when you go live. So you want to make sure it will work without it. So I need to do change the Docker file. That. So it's going to use the environment variable port and use. Then we'll do Heroku container push. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So building was quick because it's mostly cached. I want to change that last line. Most of these layers already exist. Actually, all the layers already exist. So pushing to the registry wasn't hard. All they had to really change is the command that gets run for that image. So that should be easier. Again, Heroku open. Cool. So you can go there right now on your phone, devict-greeter.herokuapp.com/greet. And then remember the code of conduct. Hello, hello. Hello, world. Oh, nobody's done it yet. Great. So cool, we're deploying stuff live. There's only one more thing I want to show you, but does anybody have any other questions before we go on? No? Okay. So there's two problems with what I've shown you so far. One is, oh my goodness, look how long this command is. Like, I'm just hitting like up, enter, and redoing it, but still, like, there's a lot here. That's problem number one. Problem number two is when I'm working on this, Like if you remember earlier when I had that Redis image running, I made sure to specify that this was Redis 3.0. When Tony goes to start working on my application, maybe he does Redis 2.0. And then maybe down the line, there's some kind of bug, some kind of like weird thing where like it works on my machine, but it doesn't work on his. I'm using some new feature they added in 3.0 or something like that. So how would you define that? How would you document all this stuff and put it together and make this like part of your like manifest for this application, that this is what we depend on? So there is a feature, there's a tool called Docker Compose. And I am not going to write this from scratch. I'm going to copy my existing one. So you make a file called dockercompose.yaml, just yet another markup language. And the syntax, the way it works is you say, what version of Compose? We're looking for version 2. What are those different services that you need? So I need to have a service which we'll just call web. And there's not a base image for this. I just want you to build the current directory. That's where you get the image for this service. I want you to define these environment variables. So we're just going to say port 80. Redis URL should be redis://redis. I want to publish these ports. We're going to say 80 on the container should be 80 on the host. I want to go ahead and mount the volume, the local volume. And then you can also say that it depends on another container. So like it won't start when it's trying to like launch all the different containers. It can try to wait so that certain containers will be launched after others. And then I want to have another container for Redis, which will just be based off of the Redis 3.0 image. I don't need to change anything else about it. It's fine. So let me look. All right, I've got that Redis one running. So we're going to do docker rm my Redis. I'm at docker stop my Redis. Now I can remove it. So now there's no containers running. We're going to use the command docker compose up. So it's made, that's a lot of stuff. Let's zoom out. So you can see it like built the local directory, and then it's running the web container. It's also running the Redis container, and it's got like all of the output from all these containers just kind of like mixed together here. But this is all running. So if I go look let's see. There we go. Greet compose. Hello compose. Greeted. I greeted compose. Great. So this is all working. I can take that Docker Compose YAML file and commit it into the repository. And then everybody that works on it, like as part of the development environment, would know to just, oh, you run Docker Compose up, and it will build all of the services that I need. If you don't want it to monopolize your terminal like this, you just let it stop. One moment, it stops. Stop. If you do Docker Compose up -d for daemon, and it'll start them. In this case, it didn't have to build them because they've already been built. So it just started them. Now they're running. Do Docker PS. We're going to keep going up and down. Let's get this up on the screen. You can see that it's, so it defines the names for you. Like it uses like the name of the project, which defaults to the name of the folder. So it made a container called greet web1, greet redis1. You could have it scale up multiple instances of Redis for you if you needed to. Like if you wanted to simulate an environment where you're doing some kind of replication or something like that. So great, I've got that all put together. One that I use at work somewhere. I was messing around with different versions of MySQL. But yeah, so like my application depends on Boson and Influx and MySQL. So I have this YAML file which defines these are the 3 things that I care about, has them all linked together, and so it defines the environment variables, mounts volumes. So it's great. Anybody have any questions?
How do you take that large scale application?
How do I deploy my Docker Compose YAML file? Yeah, that's a good question. And that gets into the area that I don't really have a good answer for you. There are services that will do that, and Docker Compose is just one way to do this. There's other tools like Kitematic and a couple other things for like managing your containers. Actually, Kitematic, I think it's just like a GUI on top of the Docker client. But that's where if I wanted to take these 4 things, like here, these are just like external dependencies, but if I had another one for like to build my app, so if I had like those 4 things and I wanted to take them together as an application and deploy that, what I would probably use would be like Kubernetes. So this is now when you get into container orchestration, where you're deploying like groups of containers. It's not a YAML file, it's like JSON or something, but it's the same kind of idea where you define all of the different pieces of your architecture, of your infrastructure, and you can say like, just deploy all that. Give me like, I need like 5 Redises, 2 MySQLs, my web app, a load balancer, something, and like deploy it all. Pretty fancy. I know, never done it. Any other questions?
Sometimes in the past people have been like, don't use Docker production, just use development. So some people say that.
I think that's, so the question was that sometimes people will just say like, don't use Docker for production, just use it for development. There's a lot of, like, I don't have hard numbers for you, but my impression is that there's plenty of stuff out there in production running Docker, or containers really. There's a lot of people will like kind of just start with like a single service within their infrastructure. Like I showed you that GeoIP thing. Like we just like, oh, we'll just take this like one GeoIP thing, we'll get that running on Docker. Okay, it's great. Good. And then maybe add something else in. There's plenty of companies using Docker in production. Yeah. So like I mentioned too, Docker's not the only container. Not only are they not the first people to use containers, they're not the only people using containers now. Like one of their competitors is CoreOS is like a Linux distribution that's specifically built around containerization. They have a lot of different tools, and one of them is called Rocket, which I'm actually wearing the t-shirt of. And that's not an endorsement of Rocket. I have a t-shirt. If I had a Docker t-shirt, I would have worn it today. But yeah, so like there's a bunch of different options.
Do you guys have your own Docker registry that you use for your?
So the question was if we use our own Docker registry at work, and we don't. We just use like Docker Hub or like I think like if you use Amazon for deployment, you can use, I think they have a registry. I bet they do. Or like that example, the little app that I just deployed earlier to Heroku was using like Heroku's registry. But yeah, it would be like from what I know about your organization, I don't think that would be out of line to host your own registry. And when you build an application for some client, you could be like, hey, we put it on the registry and here it is and it's available for you. Anybody have any other questions? Jason?
So I started using Docker just because I found a great image and it had everything I wanted. It's all wired together. But after I installed it, the new Ubuntu phase 1, and there was a security update. And so I shelled into it. I ran the Ubuntu update for the distribution. So I got the security then patched. And so now I'm like managing my own image. I'm not using the one from the repository anymore.
Right.
And I'm making additional changes as I find like I didn't like the way it was set up. So at first I wasn't sure what to do. And I don't know if you use like the Docker commit.
Right.
To do that.
So for the video, the question was about, he was describing a scenario where he was using a container from Docker Hub, I think, that was already, looked like it was perfect for what he needed, but then there's a security update. The image wasn't updated. So to update himself, he's like managing it himself and trying to keep that image up to date. Yes, Docker commit would be probably a good one. I've never used it myself. I'm aware of it. But so what it is, for everyone else's reference, you can take a container, shell into it, make changes, and then you could say commit the current state of this container as a new image, and then use that in some way. Never done it, so I don't know how what to do after you run commit. But yeah, that would be fine to do that. Or the other thing would be to like find where it like started and fork it from there.
Yeah, so we have a base image that we got, someone else made, it's great, addition, and then we did all the updates we needed, and then we committed it, so now we have, version 2 of that image, and then we just built containers that seemed to work out a lot better, but when we didn't know what we were doing, we were deleting stuff.
Yeah.
It lost a couple days of work. Didn't know what we were doing.
It's valuable experience. Does anybody have any?
I noticed you were, in this workflow, you had the Docker set to copy all your files into the image. When you work on it, you also just add it sort of like over.
Yeah.
Is that a common workflow? It makes sense.
Yeah.
Is that common?
Yeah, I think that's common enough.
Okay. So Docker works by itself.
Yeah, so when I run, it just kind of depends on what you're doing and how often you want to do Docker build and then Docker run again. Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to think of ways to make it production ready, but also able to be developed. How can you see these files and be ready for production at the same time?
Right. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
One thing we used volumes for was our web app actually generates a whole bunch of new files. So we're actually doing a backup of the alias volume. So we're out on the host and we're backing up that every couple of hours. Our web app is generating files within, not in a database.
So the comment was talking about if you have a web application that generates files, like if a user uploads their profile picture or something, where do you save that file? With containers in this kind of infrastructure, you can't count on the file system because when you go from one instance of the application to another, it'll have a different file system. Or if the container gets destroyed and restarted, it's just starting from the base image, that you've defined, or the image you've defined. So yeah, you can't. You have to treat the file system as ephemeral. You can mount volumes and write to those volumes and say and know that that's going to be saved to the host. There's another way where you can have volume data containers. I'm not super familiar on how those work, but that's something to look into as well. Where you can have another container that's defined as this is just a data container where we're going to this is where we're going to keep stuff, and you link it together with the other ones. Adam, you have a question?
Small collection of questions.
Sure.
So if you can't rely on file system in here, I'm guessing that applies for databases also. So you've got a database server and container, you need to have your actual data persisted someplace.
Yeah. Yes. So if you're running your database in a container, that you would want to mount, make sure you would keep stuff. So here I'm running this influx database, and I'm mounting a particular volume so that it'll stick around. If I kill this container and then make a new one, it'll start with that folder mounted. Those are just for development though. In production, I don't know. I probably wouldn't. I don't
So
know.
you have some kind of build process, just sort of speak to this question earlier, where you take your development containers and you work configurations to update your production containers with the changes that you made, and then this whole other setup for your production containers and they run on AWS.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's something that things like Kubernetes and Swarm and all those, is that part of the container orchestration system?
Yeah, I think that's part of the process.
And security, are there any tools in place with Docker Hub or any promises made about software being up to date with the security patches and the absence of none?
So the question was about security in terms of software being up to date, absence of malware, and no, I don't think you get any guarantees. So like for example, I go to Docker. I just put mine to sleep. I wonder if that killed the live stream. That looks still okay. So we go to Docker Hub. Say I wanted to run. So like here, like this is the official InfluxDB one. So you can probably trust it. You still should like inspect it before you actually run it. But like here, these are just somebody made one and committed and pushed it. So if I wanted to look into it, like if I wanted to use it, for some reason I thought that it was going to work well for what I was doing, what you would want to do is like look at the Docker file, for example. So in this case, you can see this one is using this as its base. I would need to go investigate that one. And like eventually you're going to find a base that you trust, like a base like Alpine or Ubuntu, or a base like Scratch, which like starts from nothing. And like look through here and see like, okay, what is this? What's in this Docker file? What things are we adding? Do I trust this? Like you have to inspect it if you're going to use a public third-party container, because anybody can push Docker Hub. Now the official ones, yeah, I don't know if they do any kind of. I think that's just a matter of trust at that point, on how much you want to look into the official ones before you use them. Well, if no one has any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast.